Thank you to all of you who've joined us today. We have several of these webinars scheduled at different times throughout the day. And it is our effort to try to make sure that we are responding to the needs that our members have in their own work at a country level, as well as making sure that we have a global voice, shared voice at the UN that represents the views of our members globally. So I'm going to pass it over to Anna, who's going to give you a much more detailed description of both the process and where we are up till now in what we think our key messages will be on Article 24. So thank you very much, and we look forward to hearing back from you about today's webinar.
Thank you, Connie. Okay, our next panelist is Anna McCrory, Director of Global Initiatives, Policy and Human Rights.
So thank you, Connie, for that, and I just echo Connie's comments in thanking everyone for being here. What I'm going to try and do is describe a little bit about the process itself, and then pause and take questions if anyone has questions, and then get into some of our key messages. So what we're looking at is the UN Committee on the Convention of Rights of Persons with Disabilities, specific to their work on education. And as part of their review of national reports in regards to the implementation of Article 24, what they have agreed to do is host a day of general discussion. That's going to be held in Geneva on the 15th of April at the UN. And that is going to be a first step in developing a general comment on education. General comments are typically a principled comment or an authoritative statement drafted by the committee that is used to interpret provisions in the convention. The committee this year has announced that it will develop 3 general comments. They will do one on Article 6 on women with disabilities, one on Article 19 on living and being included in the community, and one on Article 24. Typically, the process for developing a general comment is 2 to 3 years. So while they have announced their intention to do these ones, we don't anticipate they will be completed in this calendar year. The general comment on education will be drafted based on the conclusions of the discussions at the day of general discussion. The comment, once it's started to be developed, will be made available, and there will be further opportunity for providing input and providing feedback. But the day of general discussion becomes our first point of entry and our first opportunity to begin to influence these discussions as they are happening. So in terms of submissions, the day of general discussion will be held, as I said, on the 15th of April in Geneva at the UN. All interested stakeholders have been invited by the committee to make submissions. That information is available on their website. They don't give any real specific detail about the framework that they're looking for or the content that they're looking for, but they're generally asking for your comments around education and the implementation of Article 24. The only firm requirement is that submissions can be no longer than 10 pages. And they must be submitted directly to the committee secretariat, Jorge Araya. I meant to have his email address there. I apologize for that. I'll make sure it's available before the end of the presentation. In terms of the program, so at the actual day of general discussion, the program itself is developed by the committee. Speakers and panelists are selected by the committee. Community and civil society organizations can make recommendations, but it is up to the committee to finalize and determine who will be speaking. The draft program that they have made available so far indicates there will be 3 panels. Those panels are going to focus on the right to education and have more of a substantive content focus. The second panel will be how can inclusive education be realized, and that will look more specifically at special measures and reasonable accommodation. And then lastly, they've identified specific sectors of persons with disabilities, and those include people in rural areas, the global south, people living in zones of conflict. And again, it'll be the committee that determines who is selected for those. A speakers list, so the committee will select panelists who will be on those panels, and then there is opportunity within the day for dialogue from the floor, a bit of a question and answer period. Even that speaker list will be determined by the committee. Requests need to be sent to the committee in advance, and they will develop and coordinate that speakers list for the discussion periods. Typically, we have found that organizations who do submit written submissions are given priority on that speakers list, and obviously speakers need to be in Geneva to be part of that discussion. So I'm going to pause there for a moment to see if anyone has questions specific to the day of general discussion or to the general comment. So when we start looking at positions and key messages for the submission Inclusion International is developing, we wanted to step back and have a general analysis of where the committee has made comments on inclusive education and Article 24, and just trying to understand what their position is around education. And our initial scan of the committee's concluding observations has been quite positive. They've really indicated a progressive approach to inclusive education that's very consistent with many of Inclusion International's. And in their call for submissions, they explicitly recognize that exclusion from education also hinders their meaningful participation on an equal basis with others in all spheres of life. So overall, things that we've heard from the committee include their commitment to ensuring an inclusive education system, looking at inclusion at all levels. They have made a distinction between integration and inclusion, have focused on reasonable accommodation and equality, and have really emphasized in a number of places looking at effective inclusion of students in mainstream schools and not supported or confined to special units or special classes within those schools. And have also looked at issues of budgeting and how it is that budget allocations can better be supporting education of students with disabilities. So overall, I think that we have seen a committee take quite a progressive stance, and one that we are quite pleased with. So in identifying our key messages, we thought that there were three main things that we wanted to emphasize with the committee. First, the right to education means the right to an inclusive education. Second, inclusive education means more than accommodation. And three, inclusive education is better education for all. So what we mean by that is we hear a lot, increasingly we're hearing support that students with disabilities should go to school. When we start to have further conversations about that, the question becomes about what school. So we want to really emphasize the right to education is an inclusive education. It's not simply the right to go to school, it's the right to go to an inclusive school. We know that a quality education is an inclusive education, and that inclusive education works and contributes to better education for all children. We know segregation cannot and will not achieve equality. So the pieces that we've identified to do this include things like legislation, policy, human rights complaint systems, appeals processes, etc. Inclusive education, our second message, inclusive education means more than accommodation. For us, we believe the test of inclusion is in demonstrating that the education system is able to accommodate and include all children. We hear repeatedly, and we know from experience, that unless we are including the most excluded, then real systems level change for equality is not happening. We need to move from integration to inclusion. And things under this that include teacher training, outreach to parents, knowledge sharing on inclusive educational practices. And lastly, our third key message is inclusive education is better education for all. And this message looks more broadly at education transformation. It looks at linking the UN Convention Article 24 to the Sustainable Development Goals and other international commitments on education, because we know it's not just about changing schools, it's about changing the way we educate all students. So under this message, things we need to do include ensuring that the Sustainable Development Goal indicators, which are part of the post-2015 development agenda, are harmonized with the Office for the High Commissioner of Human Rights monitoring of conventions. We need to ensure that we're being consistent in the way that we're monitoring human rights across all of these mechanisms. We need to ensure that inclusive measures and indicators in all education commitments are in place so that we can monitor and track progress on the inclusion of students with disabilities. So those are our three key messages. before we get into trying to get some feedback from you guys, I wanted to pause here to see if there was any questions at this point about these messages. Our intention was to have broad messages that are able to incorporate, as you can see in these, we know that there's many things within each of the messages that needs to be done, but it still falls under 3 really clear messages. So I'll pause to see if there's any questions. Okay, if people want a few minutes to think about questions, we can move to getting some feedback from people and save time at the end for discussion as well. What we would like to hear from people who are participating on the webinar is a couple of key questions about engaging with the committee. We want to find out if people are planning on submitting to the committee and whether or not they will be in Geneva for the day of general discussion. And maybe I'll go through the 3 questions and then we can pause and go back through them one at a time. So it's about engagement with the committee. The second question is asking people to identify what are the top 3 barriers to advancing inclusive education in your country. And then lastly, a question around definitions and whether or not there is a definition, government definition, committee definition, and is it something that you support?
Anna? Sorry to stop you. We have a question for Rima. Sorry, I missed her hand, so I'm going to open her microphone if that's okay, so she can talk to you directly. Rima, go ahead.
Good morning, everybody. I just, thank you, Anna. I think I just want to go back to when you were describing the key points of Article 24 and the broad points that you were going through. And what I would like to interject with is it would be really, really important if we can identify how does what we're doing today link with other articles. I know we've worked very hard on understanding each article, and we've tried under the umbrella of Inclusion International to overlay and say how each one supports, but when you mentioned, for instance, just teacher training, the flags went in my head and said, okay, that's very important, but there's other points that are extremely important to be addressed if we're going to have positive going forward, especially when we are talking about a VASID way of implementing Article 24 throughout, different cultures, different shifts of what education is and the understanding of education. So I just want to bring out that point to see if that's something that you have thought of, and how can we, when we're addressing Article 24, explain that it is, in my opinion, the core structure that holds a lot of the other articles together.
Thanks for your question, Rima. And it's an excellent point. And I do think, I'm just trying to skim back to where I had here. It is an excellent point, and I think that certainly as part of an overarching framework in introducing the comment is really needing to recognize we know the critical difference inclusive education makes in the lives of people. So certainly being able to comment to that, and I've gone back to this slide just to highlight, because I believe we also have support from the committee in that notion. I think that they've recognized when people with disabilities are excluded from education, it impacts the whole life of that person, and it impacts all the spheres that are around them. So certainly, Rima, I think that is a critical piece to highlight, and I think being able to frame the value and the reason that getting inclusive education right is so important is because it has that lifelong implications for people. So thank you for that.
Anna, we have a question from Nazia. I hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly. They want to know, how long does it take to move from integration to inclusion?
I think that everyone is in a different path on that, or a different place in that journey, and putting a specific time frame on that is not an easy thing to do. I'm not sure if Connie might want to also jump in on that conversation, but really it's about looking at where people are right now and what are the steps that we need to put into place. In some places, I think that is going to take longer if it requires taking down a lot of barriers that have already been put in place. I think in a number of countries where we perhaps haven't seen development for education for all, there's a huge opportunity to ensure that building an education system from the ground up is one that is inclusive. So I think that that's a difficult question to answer. It's not something that's going to happen overnight, and it's not something that people can do alone. It's something that is going to require significant work from governments, from community, from teachers, from schools, from ministries of education. It really does require a teamwork and a team perspective on it. So if we go back to the questions that are on your screen now, looking for some feedback from participants. From people who are on the webinar, is there plans for people to submit submissions to the committee? And is there anyone who's planning on being in Geneva for the day of general discussion? Raquel, are we getting any comments?
No, I guess that's a no from everyone.
So Inclusion International is planning on having some representation that will be there. We know the committee is still working to identify all of the panelists and to develop that speakers list, but we are aware that Diane Richler and Gordon Porter, both of whom are connected into to Inclusion International, have been asked to speak as panelists. We understand that they are reaching out to some others, including a self-advocate in Argentina and possibly 2 self-advocates from Europe. So we certainly will be coordinating a small delegation, and if you're aware of anyone who is going to be in Geneva, if you could share that information with us, we can then coordinate a schedule of events and make sure that everyone who is there is connected in and working together. So maybe moving.
Anna? Hi, yeah. Anna. Ines. You do have a question from Fosia. She's asking what exactly we are supposed to submit to the committee.
So that's a very good question. What the committee has asked is for interested stakeholders, so for anyone to write to the committee and tell them what is important about Article 24 and to hear from them around the issue of education. They haven't given any specific guidelines about what type of content they want in the submission. They have left that open. So generally it's assumed submissions will be submissions will include your priorities for inclusive education, probably identify key barriers and key solutions, and that has to happen within a 10-page page limit. And I realized I didn't put in the deadline for submitting is March 20th. So it is up to stakeholders to determine what they want to include in their submission, but generally our recommendation would be that those submissions are focused on your priorities, on the barriers and solutions, and one of the key reasons we wanted to do these webinars was to help influence and share our key messages so that if people were submitting, we'd be able to have consistency and coherency across submissions.
Thanks, Anna. So Nazia Hosania, who asked the first question, she's raising her hand, so I'm going to open the microphone. She has another question or a comment. Nazia, whenever you're ready.
Hello, Anna. Pleased to have you on the webinar. I'm Georgia. And what I want to know is for Geneva, I am the Secretary General of the Disabled Person Organization in Mauritius, and we are definitely submitting a shadow report for April. So we need help, especially on Article 24, where our government has still not withdrawn the reservation on education. How do you want the government to withdraw?
Rosie, just to interrupt, there was some noise on the line, so I heard you say that your government has not yet withdrawn their reservation on Article 24, and then I lost you.
Still this word. It's a reservation, and I went in Geneva to lobby for my report. Nothing has still been done. So how can we influence our government to withdraw this this reservation so as to go ahead with inclusive education, especially in a country where education is we are having an illicit system. The best is has the right for education, and those who are slow learners are categorized as these people with disability, children with disabilities. So we are very lagging behind, and we want to move now. And how can you help us to move ahead, and how can we influence for the withdrawal of this resolution? Thank you, Anna.
So I think a couple of comments to that, Ferozia. Thank you for your question. And it highlights a really good point about submissions that are before the committee. So I think that you referenced that you've been part of the parallel report that has gone in and that Mauritius is currently being reviewed by the committee. So that is a separate and distinct process from submissions related to the day of general discussion, but represents an interesting opportunity to use a submission for the day of general discussion to reference either the parallel report or the issues around Article 24. So my recommendation certainly would be, I haven't seen the parallel report, but I am assuming that it identifies the reservation as a problem and is recommending that that be removed. I don't know, I'm not familiar with the grounds for the reservation or what rationale the government is using for that. The committee itself, when it reviews Mauritius, it will be developing something called a list of issues. And one way you can try and influence the government is to get the reservation put on the list of issues. So working with the committee to identify the reservation and to identify the lack of effort on Article 24 as a problem. So if it's part of their list of issues, the government then has to respond to that question. And then lastly, the committee issues what we call concluding observations. And those concluding observations are used to make recommendations to the country to suggest the direction that they should be moving in. So trying to work directly with the committee and other committee members to try and ensure that these issues get raised in that reporting process is important. I think secondary to that, or in addition to that, being able to consider making a submission to the day of general discussion that focuses on the reservation and focuses on your concerns about inclusive education in Mauritius. So that could be identified as a priority, and you could or as a barrier, and then look at some solutions around it. So then the committee is actually hearing in two different ways the challenges and problems, both with the reservation, but also with the lack of effort in advancing education for people with intellectual disabilities.
Thank you, Anna. We have a question from Christine Bierli. She says, should as many organizations as possible submit a comment, or should as many as possible stand behind the submission of Inclusion International?
Excellent question. And a difficult one for me to answer. Certainly I think the committee would rather have fewer submissions that are representative of more people. I think they are more likely to read submissions that are representing larger groups of people. Having said that, if people are going to submit, which of course they are welcome to do, and that is a great way of engaging and being part of the discussion, so I don't want to dissuade anyone from engaging, but certainly if what would strengthen that is ensuring there is consistency and coherency. So just to go back to Ferozia, to use that as an example, if she's to identify, here's our country level problem, we have this reservation, it's a big barrier for us on inclusive education, and then use Inclusion International's 3 key messages around, here is what we need to do to move forward, that provides consistency and coherency. So I think that would be a preferred way of moving forward, but do recognize, I do recognize that the committee is likely to prefer hearing from groups that are able to represent, sorry, and I'm just seeing a message, I may have misstepped. The question about Article 24 reservation may have been from Nazia, I apologize for that. but I think that it is an opportunity to be able to sorry, lost my train of thought there. The committee, I think, would like to read fewer reports that are more reflective of larger groups. However, if people want to submit on their own, that's also perfectly understandable and something that the committee would read.
Thank you, Anna. I can't see any other questions, so if you want to continue.
Great. So just in terms, oh, Connie wants to say something. Sorry.
I'm sorry, I had a technical difficulty for what a surprise. Just a couple of comments on a few of the questions, and I'll take them in reverse order. Just on the point about whether one submission or multiple submissions strategically is better. Our experience with Article 12 general comment was that there were, I want to say, almost 100 submissions or just under that from all country-level organizations, international organizations, individuals. I think we are not going to stop people from submitting. And I think what would be really important is that if we have our member organizations submitting from their country perspective about very specific issues, I think the reservation is a good example, that would reinforce the general messages from Inclusion International. So I think what's important is a kind of coordinated response. I think one of the strategic issues that we see is there will be many voices on inclusive education. There will be many detractors from inclusive education. I think on this issue, more than many of the other issues around the convention, people with intellectual disabilities need to have their voices heard. I think the cross-disability movement will support the general position of Article 24, and as far as we can see, the International Disability Alliance is taking an inclusive education approach in their analysis and I hope in their submission. However, there is differences in the disability community about what they believe inclusive education should look like and what they believe the right to education looks like. So I think strategically it's very important that we reinforce some very high-level general messages in country-level submissions, in submissions from organizations who are friends of ours, that inclusive education means all children, including children with intellectual disabilities, and inclusive education means inclusion, not just the right to an education. An inclusive education is what Article 24 talks about. So strategically, I think those are important key messages, and we will be trying, in addition to this webinar, to get the message out about what we think the overarching messages should be if people are indeed going to be submitting country level or individual submissions. Just also, I want to go back to the questions about, two questions, I think, one about integration to inclusion. I think one of the really difficult questions for a lot of our members is, do you have to do integration before you do inclusion? And what I think is difficult is the idea that integration is getting children into an existing education system. Integration is only the act of putting a child into an existing school. Inclusion means really changing the way that school and the education system and the classroom operates so that all children can be included. My experience is that where integration has been successful in terms of just getting children into school, we don't see transformative change in schools. We simply see children in a classroom or children in segregated classrooms within a regular school. So it's not in our experience, it hasn't been a process of you have to do one before the other. I think inclusion really is fundamentally different from integration. And so we're happy and available to provide support to our members who are on that journey. We're looking for a number of different ways in which we can provide technical support, and we'd encourage you, if you think there are opportunities in your country to be moving on this issue, to write to us, and we will see what we can offer in terms of technical support. Likewise, on the issue of submissions, we are available to help any organization that's a member of Inclusion International to review submissions if you would like us to do that. We're also able to provide support if your country is submitting their general report to the committee. And we work very closely with the International Disability Alliance and the Secretariat in Geneva. So please, please let us know if you are involved in the parallel report for your country, or if you have intentions to be at the General Day of Discussion, or any other opportunity that you have to influence the committee. We would be happy to support your efforts and coordinate with the International Disability Alliance Secretariat in order to make sure that you have every opportunity to have an impact if you are engaging. So those are just some offers of direct support. We've been doing this with individual country members on different issues, and I think Article 24 is a really good opportunity for us to provide support to our members and coordinate our messages globally.
Oh, we have a question from Fauzia. She says Zanzibar would like to submit to the committee.
And will anyone from Zanzibar be in Geneva for those discussions?
She said no.
Okay. So if we don't have any other questions on that at this point, maybe we move to the second question we have for you, for participants, about identifying the barriers and just ensuring that our views and our understanding of the issues are representative of what's happening on the ground and at a country level, and have asked participants to identify their top 3 barriers to advancing inclusive education in your country. If people would also like to follow up offline, certainly you can email these comments to myself or to Connie. We'll make sure all that contact information is available, or please feel free to jump into the conversation now. So if there's no comments or reactions to that right now, again, please feel free to share additional information with us offline via email. Sorry, I'm just getting another screen.
Yes, Nazia says, one of the greatest barriers in Mauritius is the increased number of NGOs benefiting from CSR funds and intaking children as from 3 years old.
Can we just ask what the CSR funds are?
Sure, yeah, she can hear the question, so hopefully she'll reply. And Fauzia says that one of the barriers is the large classes. Nazia, if you can let us know what CSR funds are. Let me see if I can unmute her and give her the microphone.
Can you hear me, Anna?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay, the CSR fund is the Corporate Social Responsibility Fund, which the government has asked every company to give. It is 3% of their profit that they give to NGOs to offer education to children with special needs. So as to increase the charitable attitude They take children as from 3 years old. The younger the child is, the more pity it arises, and the company gives more money. So instead, we are at the level of integration. Even the integration is not working because of these NGOs in taking children as from 3 years old. Because the parents, they are not empowered. They think that it is the best way it is the cheapest way because they don't have anything to pay. The child gets food, the child gets transport. So what is the need of fighting for an inclusive education? So this is discouraging the fight for inclusive education. Thank you, Anna.
Yeah, thank you for that. And just if I could clarify, if you can keep your microphone on for a moment. So the CSR funds 3% of profit to education. Did you say that specifically for educating children with disabilities?
No, it is not for only for educating children. It is also for alleviation of poverty in the country. So okay. the best way to get this fund is to open special schools, daycare centers, and everything. And there is no checking, no supervision of these schools, these daycare centers, which gradually will become special schools. So unlike here we are increasing daycare centers and encouraging children to go to these institutions, these daycare centers. Thank you.
Thank you for clarifying that. That's great. It's not great. It's useful information to have.
And I'm sorry, it's Connie. What country is that?
Mauritius.
Mauritius. Okay. I think that's a really good example of something that we could add to our submission, highlighting the role of international NGOs negatively or positively, and also the idea that governments are using private funds to create sort of charitable models of care, and that children, because of that, are being diverted out of regular education to care kinds of facilities. That's a really important issue that we've heard from members in Latin America. It's issues that we've heard in parts of Africa, and I think it's not unique to those regions. We'll try to write a piece on that, and maybe you could give, if we share it with you, you could give us some feedback, and we could use Mauritius as a specific example.
If it is for the interest of the children with special needs, then you are most welcome to add it on your recommendation. Thank you.
Okay, we have another question from Rima. Rima, go ahead.
Talking about barriers and what Mauritius has just shared, also I can echo that in the MENA region, but in a larger scope, because what we are facing in MENA is the fact that not only
Silenciado.
Students with intellectual disabilities are not even integrated in most countries. There is a larger, more dangerous, in my opinion, practice that's happening, which is the separation of national and international children. What most of the countries in MENA have a large population of expat families that are residing, especially in the Gulf countries, and those children do not have the right to attend national schools. So the influence, when it happens on a government level or a Ministry of Education level, we are excluding a large number of students that don't even have the right to education in schools. So they are pushed to either go into institutions or go into ungoverned private, they call them schools, I call them glorified babysitting institutions for these children to attend. And there are no measures that have been put forward, as far as I can see, neither by the UN or any of the UN educational organizations, to force these government agencies to start having a coherent level of administering education to all. So I think it's really, really important for us to include these voices that are not being heard and they are just in the background and no one is paying attention to them. And I can tell you that in countries such as UAE and Qatar and Bahrain and Saudi Arabia and most of the Gulf countries, that is becoming a huge, huge concern and problem, because not only that the government does not practice inclusion in their classroom, they're also excluding anybody who does not have the right to enter these schools. So I don't know where we can bring that to say that's not, that's something that we need to address.
Thank you. I'm going to see maybe Connie, if you have a comment on that.
I think it's an important issue, and I've heard you talk about this before, Rima, and others in the region. I'm wondering if it's something, certainly it can be raised in the context of the Education Article 24, but I wonder also if it's something we should raise with the Special Rapporteur on Disability, who is newly appointed, and I'm going to get her name wrong, Catalina
Devanda.
Say it again.
Devanda? I might be getting it wrong as well.
Yeah. and Catalina is coming to Geneva during the General Day of Discussions, and she's going to, I think, be just around and possibly convening some of her own discussions while she's there. This might be something interesting that she would pick up, because it's about education, but it's also about the right to supports and services in the community, I would assume, Rima, for those populations. So I think we'll definitely take note of that and see where there might be some opportunities to raise it additionally outside of the Article 24 discussions, because I think it has implications obviously for education, but then also quite a bit more broadly.
We have another comment from Fauzia. She says, inadequate capacity of teachers. Most of them attend seminars and short courses and few hold certificates. And Nazia says, another barrier is that NGOs are taking children with learning difficulties and putting them in their schools or daycare centers. We all know that children who are slow in learning will benefit much in an inclusive system rather than being excluded in a daycare center.
Thank you for both of those comments, and certainly I think something that will be addressed in our report, and also I think something that is something that the committee would support and endorse as well. They've made some pretty strong statements around training, specifically that it should be mandatory for all teachers. It needs to be inclusive in content and needs to be broad in scope. So it's about university training, so that the training happens in service days, it happens in any training that's going on for any teachers more generally. And they've been very clear on that, so I think certainly there will be significant support for recognizing that issue. And then also the committee they haven't specifically endorsed a no rejection policy, but they have taken positions that are consistent with that. So I think that second piece about highlighting the need for kids to be in school versus in daycare is a critical piece to this, and also something I anticipate we would have support from the committee on.
And just to add on the teacher training piece, one of the things that I've noticed when visiting our member organizations in different countries is a lot of initial efforts at inclusive education tend to focus on diagnostics of different disabilities. So when we talk in terms of teacher training, what you often see is training about Down syndrome, training about you know, how to teach deaf children, how to teach blind children, and it focuses much more on the impairment and the disability than it does on strategies for inclusion in a classroom. And I think while the understanding of the particular needs of different children with disabilities is important for teachers, what I see really missing in the teacher training curriculum is strategies for how to teach a diversity of children in your classroom. And that is different from the particular needs of any one child. So inclusive education training is about how do you adapt the curriculum so that there are 5 different kinds of learners in your class and you're able to use one curriculum with 5 different strategies or 2 different strategies. So I think there's a lot to be done, not only in making teacher training systemically part of the university curriculum, but also distinguishing between what has typically been focused on what I would think of as special ed, so things like impairments and knowledge of disability, diagnostics and those kinds of things, down to how do we give teachers the skills and strategies they need to function in classrooms where they have probably a diversity beyond disability, including language differences, and I think getting people to think about inclusion and teacher training much, much more broadly than thinking about particular accommodations. Not to say that those accommodations aren't needed.
So not seeing any other questions at this point. On definitions, it's a question that has come up from many of our members, from many governments, from many other organizations. So in part, I wanted to use this as an opportunity to ask participants, is there a definition of inclusive education that's used in your country? Is it a government definition or a community definition, and whether or not you support that definition? And again, if you had further information on this or any of the other questions, please feel free to send us follow-up information by email. But if there was any just quick answers about yes, we have a definition and we like it, or no, yes, we have a definition and we don't like it, or however, would be really helpful too.
So Fauzia says, yes, we have adopted UNESCO. And then Nazia says, training is a very important issue, but very often when these teachers are faced in a classroom with especially children with intellectual disabilities, they are at loss. So placement is also to be added in the curriculum, and especially the work with parents, looking parents as parents and not as adversaries, sorry.
Before I wrap up, I just wanted to say thank you again to everyone for being on the webinar today and for engaging with us in this discussion, and also to reiterate that we would really value any additional feedback, or if you had any questions off the webinar, please feel free to email me or Connie or anyone on our team, and we can follow up with you through email.
I would just very quickly say thank you again, and I'm thinking that as we look at the 3 webinars that we will be conducting today and some of the comments people have shared, it might be useful for all of you, for us to give you back some report on the key things that people identified as issues. So we will obviously use them in our own submission and share that with you for your input. But also it might be useful just internally among our members for those who were on the webinar to hear what issues were raised and sort of give you a report back on that. This has been very, very useful to me. I hope that you found it useful, and please give us feedback and we'll try to continue to improve the way that we are sharing information and getting information from you. So thank you very much. Raquel, any technical things we need to do before we sign off? Over to you.
Thank you, Connie. No, just a couple of final comments are coming through from Fauzia. She says, inclusive education is the dynamic approach of responding positively to pupils' diversity and of seeing individual differences, not a problem, but an opportunity for enriching learning. That's from Fauzia. And Nazia says, thanks for the webinar, and this will definitely help me in my process of writing the report for submission. So
and again, Nancy, if there's anything we can do to help you, please let us know.